Laura Simmons was the kind of person who noticed things other people had learned to stop noticing. She noticed when the elevator at work stopped at a floor and nobody got in, but the button had been pressed, which usually meant someone had changed their mind about something, and she always wondered what. She noticed when the coffee at the break room had been sitting too long by the way the smell changed from inviting to tired. She noticed when people were pretending to be fine, which was most of the time, and she had learned not to say anything about it because most people who are pretending to be fine are not looking for someone to notice. She was 34 years old and worked as an account manager at Mercer & Bell, a mid-sized financial consulting firm in downtown Chicago that had the kind of carpeted hallways and glass-walled conference rooms that make every conversation feel like it is being evaluated for something. She had worked there for 6 years. She was good at her job in the way that people are good at jobs that use only part of what they are capable of, which is a specific kind of competence that looks like success from the outside and feels like something slightly less than that from the inside. She had learned to be efficient. She had learned to be professional. She had learned that in rooms where everyone is trying to take up the right amount of space, the fastest way to lose ground is to take up too much by caring visibly about things that the room has decided are not worth caring about. She had not, however, learned to stop noticing. It was a Thursday in November when it happened. The kind of November Thursday that Chicago produces with casual indifference, where the wind comes off the lake with enough force to make you understand why the city has the reputation it has, and the rain is not dramatic, but is instead the persistent, humorless kind that soaks through to the second layer before you have fully registered that it started. Laura was leaving the office at 6:45, which was later than she had planned and earlier than she was expected to stay, which was the permanent arithmetic of her working life. She had her coat buttoned and her bag over her shoulder and was walking the 2 blocks to the parking garage with her head down against the wind when she saw the woman. The woman was standing at the corner of Michigan and Wacker, next to a mailbox, holding 2 grocery bags that were not designed for rain and that had started to give way at the handles in the way that wet paper does when it has been trusted with more than it can hold. She was in her late 70s, maybe older, with white hair pressed flat by the rain and a coat that was adequate for the temperature, but not for the water. She was not asking for help. She was standing very still with the focused expression of someone who is using all available concentration to hold 2 failing bags and remain upright in wind and is not allocating anything left over for asking strangers for assistance. Laura stopped. She looked at the woman for 1 second, which was long enough to see everything she needed to see, and then she walked over. She took the bags without asking because asking takes time and the handles were going, held them against her own chest where her coat could help. Asked the woman where she was going. The woman looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has lived long enough to be surprised when a stranger does something without a visible reason. She said she was parked 2 blocks north. She said she was fine, which was the thing people say when they are not looking for someone to notice. Laura said she knew, and she walked with her anyway. What Laura did not know was that someone had seen the whole thing. Not someone she would have looked for. Not someone she would have expected to be standing at the corner of Michigan and Wacker at 6:45 on a Thursday in November, watching a 34-year-old account manager carry groceries for a stranger in the rain. But someone had been there, and someone had seen. What Laura did know 40 minutes later was what happened when she got to the office party. She had forgotten about the party until she was back in the parking garage and checked her phone and saw the reminder. The quarterly client appreciation event, held in the firm's top-floor lounge, mandatory in the way that optional things become mandatory when the people who organize them are the same people who write your annual review. She went up. The lounge had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city and catering that cost more than her first month's rent at her first apartment and the kind of ambient noise that means everyone is talking at the same volume about nothing in particular. Richard Mercer was there. Senior partner, 61 years old, the kind of man who fills a room not by being loud, but by being the person every other person in the room is aware of at all times, without meaning to be. He was the kind of wealthy that does not announce itself because it does not need to. He had built the firm over 30 years, from a two-person operation in a shared office in the West Loop to a company with 83 employees and clients whose names appeared in the financial section of newspapers. Laura had spoken to him directly 4 times in 6 years. He was standing with 3 other senior partners and 2 clients when Catherine Holt stopped Laura near the entrance. Catherine was a senior account manager, 3 years ahead of Laura, and had the specific professional energy of someone who is good at their job and also very aware of who is watching when they are being good at it. She stopped Laura with the kind of smile that is designed to be seen by the room and said, loudly enough for the nearest cluster of people to hear, "Laura, you just got here? The rest of us have been here for an hour. Some of us actually prioritize the things that matter for the team." The nearest cluster heard. A few people looked. One of the clients glanced over with the mild curiosity of someone watching something that is not their problem. Laura said she had been held up. She said it without elaborating, which was the right thing to do and which Catherine knew was the right thing to do, which was why the non-elaboration was the part that Catherine had been counting on, because a vague excuse sounds worse than a specific one in a room full of people who are professionally trained to assess what is and is not substantiated. Catherine smiled again and moved on. Laura got a glass of water and found a position near the windows and stayed for the amount of time that was enough and left. Welcome to Mafia Billionaire Stories. There are people in this world who have more money than most countries will ever see. And there are things that money does that nobody talks about in the rooms where money is discussed. One of those things is that it watches. It is always watching. And it has been watching for long enough to know the difference between someone who performs decency and someone who is decent when nobody is looking. Stay with me, because what happened the next morning at Laura Simmons' door is the reason this story exists. Like this video right now. And tell me in the comments, have you ever done something good when nobody was watching? Drop it below, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another story. The envelope was there when she opened the door at 7:15 the next morning. Not in the mailbox, not slipped under the door, propped against the door frame in a way that meant someone had placed it there deliberately. Standing, which is different from sliding something through a slot because it requires stopping and deciding and committing to the act of leaving something for someone to find. It was a cream-colored envelope with no return address and a name written on the front in handwriting that was unhurried and precise, the kind of handwriting that belongs to a generation that was taught penmanship as a discipline and not a preference. Inside was a single card. No letterhead. No logo. It said, Michigan and Wacker, Thursday, 6:47 p.m. That was my mother. She didn't tell me your name. She described your coat. It took my assistant 40 minutes to find you. I'm sorry it was not faster. RM. Behind the card was a check. Laura looked at the number on the check for a long time without moving. Then she looked at the initials again. RM Richard Mercer. She almost didn't call. Not because of the money, which was more than she would earn in a year, and which her mind kept trying to process, and kept failing to process, in the way that the brain refuses certain numbers until they have been verified several times from multiple angles. Not because of who he was. Because of what calling meant, which was acknowledging that something had shifted in a direction she had not caused and could not fully explain, and that accepting it required trusting that the shift was real. She sat at her kitchen table for 22 minutes with the card and the check in front of her, and her phone face down next to her coffee. Then she turned the phone over and called the number that had been written on the back of the card in the same unhurried handwriting. He answered on the second ring. He said he was glad she called. He said his mother had told him what happened and had described the young woman with the dark coat who had taken the bags without making a production of taking them and had walked 2 blocks without being asked and had said goodbye without waiting to be thanked. He said his mother was 81 and had been navigating the city alone since his father died 4 years ago, because she had told him in clear terms that she was not going to stop living her life because he had money enough to surround her with people who were paid to make sure she didn't have to. He said that watching someone treat her like a person rather than a problem was something he had wanted to do something about from the moment she told him. Laura said she hadn't done anything that warranted what was in the envelope. He said that was exactly the kind of thing people say when they have done something that warrants what is in the envelope. There was a pause. Then he said, "I also want to talk to you about something else. Not today. When you're ready. My office, if you're open to it. I've read your work on the Castellan account. I've been reading your work for about 8 months. I was looking for the right moment. Your neighbor apparently found it for me." Laura said she would come. She did not tell anyone at the office what had happened. Not immediately. She went in that Friday with the same coat and the same bag and the same professional efficiency that had defined 6 years of carpeted hallways and glass-walled conference rooms. She sat in the morning briefing. She answered her emails. She had a conversation with Catherine in the break room about a client deadline that was purely transactional and that Catherine navigated with the ease of someone who had already forgotten Thursday night or who had filed it under things that had produced the desired result and therefore required no further attention. Laura drank her coffee and thought about the handwriting on the card. Unhurried. Precise. Someone who decided things and then followed through. The meeting with Richard Mercer happened on a Tuesday, 12 days later, in a corner office on the 41st floor that looked out over the same intersection where it had all started. He was direct in the way that people are direct when they have spent long enough in rooms where nobody says the direct thing and have decided they are done with that. He said he was restructuring the firm's private client division. He said he needed someone to lead it who understood what the work actually required, which in his assessment was not the ability to perform competence in front of the right people, but the ability to exercise judgment when the situation was ambiguous and the only person watching was the person making the call. He said he had watched Laura's work for 8 months and had seen what he needed to see professionally. He said his mother had shown him what he needed to see about everything else. He offered her the position. She accepted. Catherine Holt found out 3 weeks later when the internal announcement went out. Laura heard from a mutual colleague that Catherine had described the promotion as surprising, which is the word people use when they mean something else entirely and are in an environment where saying the something else entirely would be inadvisable. Laura thought about that for approximately 4 minutes and then moved on to the 11 things on her calendar that actually required her attention. There was one thing she did, however, before the end of that week. She found the florist 2 blocks from the office that did same-day arrangements. She ordered something simple. White flower, nothing excessive, the kind of arrangement that says "I thought of you" and not the kind that says "Look at how much I thought of you." She wrote a card by hand, slowly, because she wanted the handwriting to be unhurried. It said, "Thank you for navigating the city alone. It was an honor to walk 2 blocks with you. Laura." She sent it to Eleanor Mercer's home address, which she had found by asking Richard's assistant with a directness that the assistant had apparently found refreshing because she provided it without hesitation. Eleanor called her the following Monday morning. They spoke for 40 minutes. At some point during that call, Eleanor said something that Laura wrote down in the small notebook she kept in her coat pocket for things worth keeping. "My son has hired a great many people who knew how to act correctly when the room was watching. You're the first one in a long time who didn't seem to notice there was a room." Laura looked at that sentence for a long time after the call ended. Then she put the notebook back in her coat pocket, picked up her bag, and went to work. There is a version of this story where Laura walks past the woman at the corner of Michigan and Wacker and gets to the parking garage 30 seconds faster and goes to the party on time and stands in the right place and says the right things to the right people, and nothing changes. That version exists. Most people live inside that version every day without realizing it. The version that actually happened was 30 seconds slower and 2 blocks longer and cost Laura nothing except the willingness to stop when she could have kept walking. The envelope on the door the next morning was not a reward for a good deed. It was evidence of something that was already true about who she was. The rain on Thursday night had simply made it visible to someone who was looking, and in this world, the people who are really looking are almost never the ones you expect.